Hello and welcome back to the Youth Ledger. I'm your host, Shiven Diwakar, and this week we're navigating a whirlwind of global developments, from fresh US trade moves and NATO's latest defense commitments, to unprecedented heat waves and rare earth diplomacy with China. Let's dive into what's happening, why it matters, and a few of my personal takes to unravel all of this news. President Trump has signaled that a wave of US tariffs may return on August 1st, targeting up to 100 countries and adding an extra 10% on nations aligned with the BRICS bloc, including China, India, and Russia. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent hinted that deals with the UK and Vietnam could model similar progress with Europe and India. Markets reacted quickly. US stock futures dipped, the dollar surged, and 10-year Treasury yields climbed as investors anticipated inflation pressure from renewed trade restrictions. JP Morgan now foresees a stagflationary slowdown, revising US real GDP growth toward 1.3% this year. For reference, last year, the US GDP grew by 2.8%, so 1.3% is tiny. That is not good news. However, I can see why the Trump administration may want to battle the influence of the BRICS nations. They could pose a serious threat to the dominance of US influence in the future, especially as sentiment on the US gets worse and worse. My concern is that tariffs may not be the best way to tackle this. Traveling to The Hague, at the NATO summit, member nations made headlines by agreeing to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. Divided into 3.5% core military and 1.5% security-related expenditures. Despite long-standing debates, this marks a significant shift away from the traditional 2% target. Leaders reaffirmed Article 5's collective defense principles, signaling a stronger unified front amid rising global threats. Countries in Eastern Europe and Canada endorsed the increase, with the UK pledging £70 million toward Ukraine-funded defense initiatives. Oddly, Spain was the only nation to opt out of this new target. Many are claiming that the 5% spending target is simply ridiculous and a strongman move from the American President Trump. But for now, all we have from Spain is that the spending target simply does not align with their world view, whatever that means. Unsurprisingly, Trump was not happy with this, but they also did not take any actions particularly representative of his anger. Now let's go to China. A rare earths deal has been agreed to between the US and China. Negotiators reached a framework agreement aimed at fast-tracking said rare earth exports from 4 high-tech and defense supply chains. Yet, due to licensing and export control issues, full implementation is still pending. Chinese rare earth exports have plunged 75% since April, straining global supply chains and forcing automakers to pause production. This deal reflects a broader effort to stabilize critical components essential for everything from smartphones to wind turbines. As mentioned in last week's episode, heat waves are hitting much of the northern hemisphere. Specifically, much of Europe is suffering under record June heat. Aliens Research estimates June heat waves will cut European GDP growth by 0.5 percentage points in 2025, with Spain possibly losing up to 1.4%. The impact extends beyond economics. Deaths, wildfires in Catalonia, power outages in Switzerland, and reduced river flows in northern Europe reflect both climate pressure and infrastructure vulnerability. These events highlight growing climate risk and underscore the need for resilient adaptation strategies. The economic fallout could also be significant. Heat spikes reduce outdoor labor productivity, strain power systems, raise healthcare costs, and damage infrastructure, making this more than an environmental crisis. It's a policy and economic crisis, affecting supply chains, work, and public health. Speaking of climate, the recent BRICS summit in Rio saw member nations call on wealthier countries to finance climate adaptation and low-carbon transitions in the global south. President Lula of Brazil was blunt, saying that denialism and unilateralism are eroding progress. These demands reflect new geopolitical fault lines as developing nations push for multilateral justice and environmental equity. How unfortunately, the probability that this call on wealthier countries will actually work out is quite low. Fossil fuels make a lot of money, and even advanced countries lack the infrastructure to transition to low-carbon energy sources. And building this infrastructure requires money that could be spent elsewhere. There is also the tragedy of the commons. Why would nations switch to green energy if not many others are? This week shows how deeply economic policy, geopolitics, and climate converge. Tariffs impact markets and inflation, defense spending shapes sovereignties, rare earth deals underpin national tax strategies, and climate extremes disrupt economies and lives globally. If you've been following any of these stories, whether it be trade, NATO, China, heat, or climate finance, share how it resonates with your communities or career paths. So thank you for tuning into this deep dive of the week's biggest developments. If you found this episode insightful, subscribe and follow. Make sure to check out the TikTok and YouTube pages if you haven't yet. And as always, please share your thoughts below. I really appreciate them. Signing out, this is Shiven Diwakar. See you next time on the Youth Ledger.